Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Hello, everyone. Our speaker today is Trip Weil, who has been practicing in the Theravadan tradition since 2004. He's a graduate of Spirit Rock's community Dharma leader and dedicated practitioner programs. And he serves on the board of San Francisco Insight, where he also leads sitting groups and teaches meditation. Trip is a psychotherapist in private practice in San Francisco. Welcome, Trip.
Thanks very much. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you and be back with you. So, I was thinking, for me, one of the things that I find actually kind of difficult about giving a talk is saying that one of the things that's hard for me is just getting rolling, just kind of like, how do I kind of explain what I want to talk about? It takes a little while to get into it. So I thought I would just actually today offer a little bit of the stream of consciousness, how I came to this topic. And it started as several things have started recently by reading People magazine online. One of those things that before the pandemic, I probably just wouldn't have found myself doing. And now it's kind of like, sure, why not? So I was browsing on People and saw a little article about Steve Irwin, the crocodile hunter guy from Australia who was killed about 15 years ago now. And the story was about his daughter who's having a first baby and just kind of her imagining how her father would respond. And that made me think about having read at the time of his death about his death, what really happened in kind of his last moments. And he was filming for one of his TV shows. He was this TV zookeeper, naturalist kind of guy, filming for one of his TV shows in Australia where he was from, in the water. And they were, apparently they were just kind of filming because it was a rainy day. They weren't able to do what they had planned to do. So they were filming him. He was with this giant stingray. And, he was kind of, he wasn't afraid of them. That they tend to be pretty skittish. And, as he was being filmed, it was the last scene they were planning to do. And he was kind of swimming away from the stingray. The stingray suddenly attacked him and just, like jabbed him with the stinger in his heart multiple times. So they managed to get him into like an inflatable raft, and they were trying to speed him to get some treatment, but he was mortally wounded. And his friend, colleague was saying to him, just like, hang in there, remember your family, this kind of thing. And his friend said, and he just sort of calmly looked up at me and said, I'm dying. That was the last thing he said. And just think about that, like that sense of being at the point where all there is left to do is to just accept that it's ending. Where the fight to live is pointless at that point. And there's an understanding and a kind of acceptance. And maybe just attending to reality. I'm dying. That's what's actually happening here. I can't imagine really what it was like or know what it was like. But it was a very kind of a grounding thought for me. And it brought to mind the story of the Buddha's death and his last words. And so that's really what I want to focus on today. The Buddha's last words. So I'll set the scene for that too, which may be a familiar story to many of you, or even most of you. But the Buddha actually understood that he was going to die about 3 months before he died. He announced to the Sangha, like, I'll be dying in 3 months. And it came to pass that in 3 months he was dying. And so there's this famous sutta, the Mahaparinibbana Sutta, which describes in detail, it's a really long one, describes in detail all the things that he was doing as his death was approaching and the final teachings that he was offering his Sangha, which had grown to be hundreds of people at that point. So at the very end, he's surrounded by hundreds of followers. He gets through kind of all the things that he has wanted to tell them, to kind of prepare them. And then he basically asks them if anyone has any final questions for him. So I'll read from the sutta. Then the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus, saying, "It may be, bhikkhus," or monks or Sangha members, practitioners, "that one of you is in doubt or perplexity as to the Buddha, the Dharma, or the Sangha, the path, or the practice. Then question, bhikkhus. Do not be given to remorse later on with the thought, the Master was with us face to face, yet face to face we failed to ask him." So there he is in his final moments, this huge act of compassion, thinking about his followers, what it's going to be like for them afterwards, and thinking one of the main things for them might be, there might be something they need to know or they want to know, and this is their opportunity, and so they should do it. They should ask. Just wanting to give them that. And adding just a little bit to the deep compassion that expresses. The Buddha was actually a reluctant teacher. When he first became enlightened, he didn't want to teach. And the story goes that a deva, a heavenly body, came to him. He didn't want to teach because he thought it would be kind of too hard. He thought that the Dharma that was too subtle, too hard to communicate. Because he thought it would just be sort of frustrating and annoying for him to teach. And this is after he's fully awakened. And the Deva comes and says, there are those with but little dust in their eyes, people who could benefit. And that was enough for him. He taught. And then here we have him, at the end of his life. And all he's really thinking about is teaching. He has completely inhabited the role. So his last thoughts are of his students. So he says, question. And no one does. And he says it again, and no one questions. And he says it a third time, and still no one speaks up. And then he says, if it's out of respect for the teacher that you don't ask, let a friend inform a friend. So I think what he means when he says that is that, like, if you're too shy to ask, whisper it to your friend and your friend could ask for you. Or maybe he means, if you're too shy to ask because you're thinking of me as your teacher, you could think of me as a friend. This is just a friend asking a friend. I'm not quite sure exactly what that means. But either way, what he's definitely saying is, don't let this opportunity pass. If there's a question, you need to ask it. And still no one says anything. And so Ananda, his faithful follower and sidekick, basically, who always gets things like mostly right and just a tiny bit. The Buddha always has a little something to add to Ananda's understanding. So Ananda says, I have great faith that basically the reason no one is saying anything is because no one here does have any doubt as to the Buddha, the Dhamma, or the Sangha, the path or the practice. And the Buddha responds to Ananda, yes, you have faith in that, and I actually have knowledge about that. I know that it is true that no one here has any doubt. Everyone here, he says, has attained at least the first stage of awakening, the stream enterer. which is characterized by letting go of doubt. So Ananda says, I have faith. Buddha says, I'll sort of see your faith and raise it to actual certainty. There are no questions here. And then he offers his final teaching. And the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus, saying, Behold now, bhikkhus, I exhort you. All compounded things are subject to vanish. Strive with earnestness. This was the last word of the Tathagata. So his final offering is, first of all, a reminder of impermanence. All compounded beings are subject to vanish. And then this last teaching, this last exhortation, strive with earnestness. So his last word, at least according to this translation, is this word earnestness. And I'd like to explore that with you. What was he really saying? It was the last thing he wanted people to hear. What was he imparting? It's one of those words that has lots of different translations. The Pali word is apamada. That's what has been translated in this translation as earnestness. Appamada. Apamada. Another way that it's often translated is heedfulness. In some traditions, it's translated as with diligence or unrelaxed mindfulness, vigilance, wariness, care. The Pali root, apamada, like many of the words that we know, they actually are, the Pali is actually a negation. It's actually, the bit at the beginning is basically like not or without. So it's actually the root of the word is what isn't present. It's not pamada. And pamada, I was reading, is a kind of carelessness that is like the carelessness of a young child, or the carelessness of one who's intoxicated, like kind of stumbling around and without even the capacity to manage that. So this is the opposite of that, apamada. Thanissaro Bhikkhu has an essay on apamada that's titled The Practice in a Word. The practice in a word, as if all of the practice can be summed up in this word, apamada, the Buddha's last word. Thanissaro Bhikkhu writes, in light of these different interpretations, like unrelaxed mindfulness or vigilance, wariness, earnestness, heedfulness, in light of these interpretations, the Buddha's final message wasn't simply to persevere. It wasn't just sort of stay with it. It was something deeper. He was saying, Thanissaro writes, don't be complacent. Watch out for danger. Protect the mind's good qualities. Don't get caught with your guard down. And this reminds me of a couple of things that have come up in my own practice, a couple of experiences. This sense about watching out and sort of being reminded to watch out for danger. I was thinking about how the first time I sat a long retreat, a month at Spirit Rock, at the end of the retreat, it was a good deep retreat for pretty much everyone there, I think. Lots of deep silence at the end. At the end of the retreat, they were encouraging us to sort of come out of silence and talk a little bit. There was, like a day where we were starting to integrate speaking again, trying to make the transition work. And then in the evening, basically all hell broke loose, and everyone was just, I think they had done some sort of final talk, and out in the foyer. This was, at Spirit Rock, which many of you might be familiar with, at the meditation hall there. Out in the foyer, there was they had set up tables with literature, and it's like starting to get a lot of energy going, and people are talking, and then people are really like chatting, and then they're chattering. It's like, it's loud. And the teachers are aware of this, of course, and they're like ringing the bell. It usually brings people into silence, right? Ringing the bell, nothing. And finally, one of the teachers, one of my close teachers, Eugene Cash, who comes here too, starts really almost yelling. He's like, "You're all suffering. You're all suffering." It was kind of funny. And it was also just so helpful. It's like here we are, we'd spent this month in practice, and suddenly we had let go of this concern about whether we were suffering or not. Like we were just suffering without even really caring. We wanted to talk, like that was all we wanted. And that quieted people down. So that came up for me, like this quality of heedfulness or earnestness, being like paying attention to suffering. And then that reminded me of another experience I had after another long retreat, or during another long retreat, where there was this, kind of insight that had arisen, and it was feeling powerful in the moment, and I was just kind of sitting with it for a while, trying to kind of make sense of it, and then I felt like I had kind of understood something. And then the thought came into my mind, like, oh, wow, it's time to get serious about suffering. That was the way it came up. It's time to get serious about suffering, which was interesting to me that it was coming up in this moment of ease, like I would have this thought to return to suffering or to actually pay more attention to suffering. But I think that was a very helpful thing to bring to mind. Because what I really was seeing was that there are these many ways that I haven't and still don't care about suffering. Like I care about, the big S suffering a lot, pay a lot of attention to that. But there are lots of little moments of suffering that I feel like I just don't really take very seriously. I kind of don't bother with it. It's like, oh, well, whatever. So that's how I'm holding this word appamada, as being like taking suffering seriously, caring about it, caring about even the little bits of suffering that might arise and fall away pretty quickly, letting them matter, letting them land, being earnest and heedful to those moments of suffering. So the invitation is, I'll describe a few of the sort of garden variety kinds of suffering that I think I'm experiencing kind of often, like probably what I think might be like 75% of the little bits of suffering that happen in a day for me that I'm aware of, at least. And the invitation is to think about what they might be for you. Or if you want to take a step back from that, to think about what is this thing that the Buddha is pointing to that could be translated as earnestness or heedfulness. For me, it resonates as this idea of paying attention to suffering, caring about it. But maybe for you, there's another way that resonates. So much of the Dharma is just like, how does it really land for us? And it's going to land differently for each of us in a kind of unique way. It's the beauty of it. So as I'm speaking, just maybe allow that to be in the back of your mind. How does this land for you? What does it mean to be earnest or heedful? Or what are the forms of suffering that you might not notice? The first one that comes up for me is just the the way that I can get lost in sense pleasure kind of over and over again. And, not like major sense pleasure, but just kind of simple sense pleasures, something tasty or a pleasant smell or something visually pleasing. Basically just using the senses as a kind of refuge. Like, oh, good, I don't have to be in unpleasantness for this moment. And it's really easy for me to just allow that to happen. They come and go, whatever the pleasant thing is, at some point, it goes away. Usually I'm pretty much okay with that. Like the suffering of feeling kind of invested in it is pretty mild. I don't cry, I don't beat my chest. Just like, oh, okay, well, that's gone. So that's a form of suffering that I think it comes up a lot, just like a really simple, like attachment, investment in a sense pleasure, not just noticing that it's pleasant and even appreciating that it's pleasant, but actually kind of investing like, oh, this is kind of how it's supposed to be. I know it's not going to be this way forever, but it is how it's supposed to be. That's kind of nice. Or a kind of a more common version of that really is even the investing in the sixth sense, the in Buddhism there are the six senses actually, the sight, sound, smell, touch, taste, and then also the sense of the mind, the activities of the mind. And I take refuge, in a way, in that all the time, too, without really noticing it as suffering. The like repetitive thought process. There's a way that it can seem like it's productive. As I was sitting just now, there was a thought process about, this talk and how it's going to go, and what am I going to say, and all that kind of stuff. And, it definitely was helpful to have planned the talk, but there was also an awareness, I think, a little sharper now because of what I wanted to talk about. There was an awareness that, like, I'm not planning right now. I'm not planning at all. I'm just like spinning. And what I'm really doing is trying to feel okay in myself. And I'm trying to feel okay in myself because I'm just a little nervous and I'm not sure how it's going to go. And I want it to go well. All that kind of natural stuff that comes up. But what I'm doing is I'm constantly thinking, not just in that moment, but constantly thinking about, like, how can I make things better? How can I get something done? Or have I upset somebody? And if so, what can I do about it? I'm constantly just kind of scheming and tinkering in the mind. Just, well, maybe I could do this, or da, 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 da. That thought process, just on and on and on. Constantly. Not a huge form of suffering, like not really, very human. Very common, I'm sure, or at least that's my version of it. And maybe you have one that's common for you. But it's suffering. I heard a talk recently that from Ajahn Suchito, and he was pointing to how that kind of thought process, first of all, it is right there on the path, the chain of dependent origination, the Buddha's really profound teaching on how suffering gets created. It's that part of the path of that process that's called becoming. It's when we start to inhabit an experience as if it's us, it's me. And he pointed out too that it's a certain kind of conceit or arrogance in a way. It's kind of like, well, I'm doing this. I'm in charge. This is for me to take control over. And even when it's practice, it has that same kind of energy. Like, I'm kind of mastering the Dharma. And he pointed out, it doesn't really work that way. It's not like we're building something or we're creating something. It's more like, we're growing something, and we're not even really growing it. Like, we're not growing the Dharma. The Dharma is growing. We're just creating a set of circumstances where hopefully that can happen. Hopefully good things will come up, and we can set that intention at least, and we can, again, be heedful or mindful. Is that how it's going, or is it not how it's going? Are we creating the circumstances that are going to lead to freedom, or are we creating circumstances that are adding to difficulty? And again, real, kind of simple versions of difficulty, just, the little moments. And that's really the way to work with this particular kind of suffering, I think, is just that kind of renunciation or letting go. I'm not going to try to control this. My role is to be present. My role is to return to just awareness and what's going on, and then see, what do I do from here? Just what's the next step from here? And there's often a kind of relief in seeing things from that perspective, I think. Like, the suffering ends quickly. Just like, oh yeah, that's right. I'm just here. I'm in a room. We'll see what the next words are. The kind of chatter in the mind quiets, and there's just more presence in the body. Well, here we are. So, one form of suffering and its end that, in my experience, is around all the time. Another form of suffering that I find myself not really paying enough attention to is the suffering of my practice or my awareness being just a little bit off somehow, like either too tight or too loose. I'm kind of daydreaming and I don't really care. Or I'm kind of agitated, and while I care, I'm sort of allowing myself to be swept up in the agitation rather than being constructive or being aware of it and working with it. There's a famous sutta that I actually think I've shared with this group at a different time about Venerable Sona, one of the Buddha's followers, who was a real strong kind of ardent practitioner. He worked really hard in practice, but he was struggling. He was really pushing, and he was getting frustrated because it wasn't bearing fruit. All this practice, all this effort, and so this is at the end of a long day of walking. It said he was walking so much the soles of his feet were split and bleeding. And he basically just had this thought, maybe I should just give it all up. Maybe this is just pointless. I should stop. And the Buddha, it said, heard the thought. He was, kind of generally nearby, but he wasn't right there. And he certainly wasn't talking to Sona. But he heard the thought, and he instantly manifested himself in front of Sona, which was the kind of thing he could do. So now the Buddha is sitting in front of Sona just after he's had this thought, maybe I should give it up. The Blessed One said to him, just now, as you were meditating in seclusion, did this train of thought appear to your awareness? And then he's quoting the train of thought. Of the Blessed One's disciples who have aroused their persistence, I am one, I, Sona, am one, but my mind is not released from the fermentations. What if I were to disavow the training, return to the lower life, enjoy wealth, and make merit? And Sona's like, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Sona says, yes, Lord. Now, what do you think, Sona? Before, when you were a house dweller, were you skilled at playing the veena? The veena being, this ancient instrument, kind of like a lute. I think it still exists in some form in India. Yes, Lord. And what do you think? When the strings of your veena were too taut, was your veena in tune and playable? No, Lord. And what do you think? When the strings of your veena were too loose, was your veena in tune and playable? No, Lord. And what do you think? When the strings of your veena were neither too taut nor too loose, but tuned to be right on pitch, was your veena in tune and playable? Yes, Lord. In the same way, Sona, over-aroused persistence leads to restfulness. Overly slack persistence leads to laziness. Thus, you should determine the right pitch for your persistence. Attune the pitch of the 5 faculties to that, and there pick up your theme. So he's basically saying, you just have to pay attention if you're too tight or you're too loose, and then just make an adjustment. Just bring a little more energy, one of the spiritual faculties, if things are too loose. Or perhaps bring in a little more concentration, a little more equanimity if things are too tight. Relax a little. And this is the kind of thing that I find is very sort of obvious in certain ways, very smart as a teaching, but also very easy, unfortunately easy to ignore and just be like, oh, well, the mind will sort itself out. It doesn't ever stay too sleepy for long because eventually I'll take a nap or something. Or, if I'm agitated, well, the agitation will eventually pass. I'm just going to kind of go with it and it'll move along eventually. Sort of let things sort themselves out. So this is what I'm really trying to pay attention to in my own practice. And by practice, I also mean day-to-day, moment-to-moment experience. Can I notice that the mind is too tight or too loose and just sort of get interested in that as opposed to letting it run its course? And it's very helpful, I think, really helpful. It was helpful for Sona. He awakened after that. That was what he needed to hear. So another form of just really sort of, work-a-day, mild, moment-to-moment suffering. I hope that flavor is coming through, just the way I'm relating to this teaching of Apamada is just like, what's it pointing to in like moment-to-moment experience that just would be easy to slough off and not even get involved with? That kind of getting caught in sense pleasure, the thinking mind, just not caring if the mind is a little agitated or a little too lazy. And then I'll offer one more that I find coming up a lot, which is aversion, not liking or wanting to push something away. It's a form of suffering that I indulge a lot. Feel like I've been indulging it a lot over the past few years, the political situation, and indulging it in the last year with the pandemic too. Sort of like I feel like, well, I deserve to be aversive. Like, this sucks. Like, of course I want to push this away. not seeing the suffering in that, the pain really in that, in not in the situation that I'm responding to, but in the response, the pain that's embedded in that rejection. And again, something that helped me kind of work through this was remembering something that had come up in my own practice. It has to do with sensations in the body. I used to, when I would practice, I would get this kind of pain in my nose. It's like pressure, like just sort of pushing down. It was like someone was just pushing on my nose. It would come up with practice that otherwise felt like it was helpful, fruitful, but like this pain would come in or this pressure, and I'd become fixated on it. It's like, this is getting in the way. Like I'm having a good sit, but now this thing is here again. And I hate it. Make it go away. And sometimes it would go away on its own. And I'd be like, oh, whew, finally, like I've broken through. But it kept coming back, and I kept having that same kind of relationship to it. And so I started to really explore that pushing, and not the pushing, both the pushing on my nose, but also what happened as I reacted to it. And what I found was that the harder I tried to push it away, the stronger it got. It was like some kind of curse, like the thing I most want to get rid of is the thing that is happening more and more and more. And it just felt really like unfair. So I push a little bit harder, like, let's get through this. And then I would kind of ease up, and it would ease up. And it's like, it's playing with me. That was really the thought. It's like, this thing is toying with me. And there was really that strong sense of like, there's me, and then there's it, and it's messing with me. And I'm trying to figure out how to mess back with it. And you get the idea. But what finally shifted for me was that I had this understanding that as I was pushing and I was feeling more pressure, I was actually feeling my own pushing. Like I was both the pusher and the pushee. I was identified with being the pusher. I was sure I was the pusher. It's like, get away, get away, get away. But it was also get away, get away, get away. It was like coming into me. The aversion was actually coming at me, not just going away from me, but coming at me. And that was a real, like, kind of aha moment for me. It's like, that's how I think aversion really works. Like, it feels like we're like trying to get rid of something, and it's painful that we're not able to, but it's also that something's trying to get rid of us, and that's painful. It's really painful. Something is basically saying, like, you're not right. You're not doing it right. What's wrong with you? Make it better. I'm sick of this. Do something about it. And that is us, I think. That's our own mind. And it's very painful to feel it. It's very painful to be on the other side of that, as we are, whether we know it or not. At least that's my perspective. Like I said, the political situation was a big teacher for me around this, the pandemic. It's like there have been so many moments where I've thought, this really needs to change. Like, someone do something about this. And have seen my own suffering increase in those moments. And can really see and really even appreciate that my own version of it is that there's this part of me that's like shifts into high gear. It's like, Tripp's in trouble. Like, we need to do something. Like, he needs help. He's going down here. Like, what can we do? What can we do? It's like the panic is coming from inside at the reaction to, it's like I'm sort of codependent with myself. It's like I hear myself complaining and it's like, oh my gosh, we got to do something about that. He can't just, like he's going to lose it. It's going to be terrible. So for me, the practice has been to really identify and hold both sides of that. Like, and if I find myself in that kind of state, of like, oh, this is horrible, to try to stop myself and come back and actually identify with the complainer and like move into that role and sort of be the one who says like, oh yeah, I'm complaining, this isn't helping, I'm sorry. Let's just try to deal with reality as it is. So anyway, a third form of suffering that comes up a lot for me, this aversion, and realizing that it's actually really painful, and seeing if there's a way to let go of the pushing away, seeing if there's a way to understand that when I reach out, when I'm like trying to slap the world, that slap only lands on my face. No one else feels it. Just me. So, that's what I'm trying to be heedful of or pay attention to. These kind of things that come up over and over again in practice, in life. Trying to care about these forms of suffering, the suffering in being swept in sense pleasure, the suffering in not having the right balance in practice, too loose or too tight, the suffering in being overwhelmed by aversion. Again, the invitation is just to think about how it resonates for you, these last words of the Buddha. And I'll let Theravadan Bhikkhu have the last word on the last words. This is really Theravadan Bhikkhu's paraphrase of the Buddha's last instruction. He writes, whatever you're doing, and especially when you don't seem to be doing anything at all, don't be complacent. Look carefully, again and again, for even the slightest stress or disturbance you might be causing inadvertently, and learn how to drop whatever you're doing that's causing it. Keep at this until there's nothing more to be dropped. So, thank you for your attention. I think we saved a little bit of time for questions or comments, anything that anyone would like to share.
Well, I'll speak since nobody else is. I really appreciated your talk, Trip, and could relate to the different examples, and especially the last one with the pressure in your nose and pushing it away and feeling yourself push back, essentially. Because recently I've been experiencing a situation that was unpleasant, and I wanted like time off from it, and it would sort of push. And finally, when I gave up pushing and just sort of embraced it, it just sort of calmed down and feels really, it takes up more like a schmooze in the corner instead of a, gorilla in the room. So.
Yeah, it's really nice to see that happen, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
See the truth of the teachings borne out.
I'll speak up. I sort of hesitated being sort of the old new boy here. I recently read that sutta, actually, not the whole thing. It's a very impressive sutta. There's a lot in there. In fact, most of his teachings are in there. But it seems towards the end, this drive, this earnest drive is primarily what we're attempting to do every time we sit and then taking it off our mat and proceeding with the day is really attempting to be as aware as one can and catching oneself when you get tripped up. Just washing dishes this morning, I went through all sorts of things. And just being able to see that. And a big learning process for me was not feeling awful about myself when I don't see it. It's sort of returning to my chronic ruminations, my chronic aversion, whatever might come up, and say, oh, there you are again, you're failing. That's been a real learning curve for me. It's just being able to see it again and then move again, watch it dissolve, sort of Manjushri with his sword cutting through delusion. And it seems like his final teachings were to his group of boyfriends following him, actually, that just continue to attempt to be aware, and you'll watch your suffering decrease. I don't know if that was a question or an answer. I don't know what I said. Thank you very much, Trip. That was a wonderful, wonderful talk.
Thanks, Chris. And I mean, what I feel like you're saying is this is how it really comes alive for you, and it's so important to just let that flower. It's beautiful, it's like, and to see that you're identifying that challenge of the way that when you catch yourself, you can be unkind to yourself, or you can not do that.
I really enjoyed your usage of scheming and tinkering. I mean, we all know how we scheme and tinkering, and it's just the way we've been processed to do it, to think through it. And all our conditioning comes through that tinking and scheming. And a lot of it's epigenetic. I mean, it can go back generations when you can catch that. What your great ancestor did during a war or whatever, you're still expressing, and you really don't have any choice in expressing it. It just comes forward, but at least you're able to see it.
Yeah, to know it's not the whole story, right?
If I could just ask a question, thank you for your talk. I'm getting a little confused, I think, between noticing, being aware of, exploring, being curious about, because those things, it seems to me, unless you do them in a split second, it feels like they're taking you out of the present, which is, I think, the goal is to be in the present. So can you do both, or?
That's a great question.
Thank you.
It's maybe one of those things that's a little bit paradoxical. But one thing I'm connecting to is that there's a way that exploration can be, in a certain way, kind of passive, almost. Like you open to it and then it comes to you. So the way that I think about it is that it's about letting go of the sorts of barriers. Imagine you're like swimming through a tube, and then you come up against a barrier, and then it opens up, and then you can go a little bit further. You can explore in that sense. It's like you are you're allowing. You're just getting rid of the thing that keeps you from being able to really know what's here. So that sense of like, if the thought process is, I'm not interested in this. This is painful. This is, why would I want to know more about this? Then it is really helpful to get interested in it, because that's the barrier. And then, it kind of parts. So it's staying in the moment, but part of the moment is there's a barrier. Does that make sense? Okay. Thanks.
How have you done with your aversion to politics in the pandemic?
Let's see. Well, I did manage to deliver a different president, so I hope you're all appreciative of that. Unless you like the old president, in which case you can blame me for it. Either way, that was my doing. No. The aversion hasn't done, I don't think I've done so well. The aversion itself hasn't done so well, obviously. But no, I mean, I'm making light of it. The spirit of your question is great. It's like, I think I've done all right, actually. I think that I realized that I was really the one who was feeling it more than, anything else. And that, I couldn't make it go away. But I could at least not, keep feeling slaps on the face over and over again. And I do think that I do think there's been some progress in that in my own experience. What do you all think? And we don't have a lot of time, but I'm not even sure who asked the question, but whoever you are, what are you finding?
I'm struggling with both of those. Yeah. It's a struggle. And I realize I'm causing more suffering by letting it get to me. And quite often the sadness and the anger takes over. Mm-hmm. And I have to work on that. And it seems pervasive.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a cloud that I kind of feel like is with me.
What that you feel like is with you? Cloud?
Like a cloud. I'm walking around with that, and a lot of it has to do with the pandemic and politics, as far as what I can see on that level.
Right. Well, it is, and the weather analogy is perfect. Sometimes it is cloudy, even for like a long time.
Yeah.
And then I think what you're doing too, and just being honest with yourself about how you feel angry, and then exploring, well, what about that might be productive and helpful, and what about it maybe isn't.
It's helped a lot to hear you talk about it today, because I really need a reminder to shift into a different relationship to it, because I am causing myself, I realize that, how much suffering I'm causing for myself with it. But I also, appreciate a deeper reminder today of paying attention to what I'm doing, like slapping myself around too often with it. And I guess staying curious to it would be a better practice, rather than having such a strong sense of judgment around it.
Yeah. But it's something to play with, at least.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Well, Trip, that's about all the time that we have. Thank you so much for your talk. Do we have any announcements today before we move on? I would like to remind us all that Donna keeps us afloat, and suggested amount is $10 to $20. And we appreciate it, and I know that you will feel better for offering it. So please remember to go to the website and contribute. Any other announcements?
David Lewis will be our speaker next week on Valentine's Day.
Trip, would you like to lead us through a closing?
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just checking in with the body, with the heart, with the mind as it is. Noticing what's present. And then connecting to any goodness that comes from our practice, from our time together. Any benefit. And if you wish, offering that, sharing that benefit. Any goodness that arises from our practice be for the benefit of all beings, everywhere. May all beings be safe, happy, peaceful. May all beings come to know true ease. I had a bell, I ding it.
Ding. Thanks, Trip.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Trip.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.